the point of this channel, isn't it? So yeah, hi guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Neha and I talk about books. Today's video is kind of like a modified wrap-up video. I want to talk about the best books that I've read in June and July combined. I don't want to do a typical normal wrap-up video because I don't know, I just don't feel like they are very watch-worthy, and also I read a lot of average books in both these months, so making them individually will just be a super long video and not very helpful. So yeah, that's why I'm kind of clubbing both of these months, because I did end up reading some amazing books in both these months which I want to talk about and I want to recommend to anybody who's watching these videos. So yeah, let's go see what are the best books that I read in June and July 2021. The first book which I finished in June was The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I have talked about this book in a couple of videos. Even though they weren't really related to this book, I managed to like bring in this book and talk about it because that's how much I loved reading this. Of course, this is very Insta and BookTube hyped. Everybody talks about this book all the time. I feel like I've seen this for the last couple of years just everywhere. But this is a Greek retelling. It is the story of Achilles, who is kind of like the greatest warrior of all time of the Greek era, and it talks about his story from the point of view of Patroclus, who is his longtime companion. Both of them grew up together and they become lovers, so it is a queer themed book. So this is set during the Trojan War, and it is about how Achilles and Patroclus make their way to the Trojan War in order to save Helen, the Queen of Troy, because of a promise made generations ago. So yeah, it talks about the story of their childhood, how they grew up together, how they fall in love, how they end up going to war, the different dynamics, how their relationship progresses through the year. The best part about this book and why I think it deserves all the hype on Instagram and YouTube is because the author is clearly a master at Greek literature. She studied it for years, but she makes it so accessible to complete newbies like me. Without dumbing down the entire text, she just explains the context of the epic. She explains why heroes are revered in the Greek myths. You don't feel lost at any point of time, which I think can be an issue with retellings. So this book essentially made me interested in reading other Greek retellings, and I'm always grateful for a book which inspires that kind of change in me. Apart from just the language and how beautiful it is, just the story of Patroclus and Achilles, the whole dynamic between both of them, and just how Patroclus in particular is portrayed, because we get most of this book portrayed from his point of view and how he sees Achilles and how he feels about Achilles. So it's just the sweetest love story. It makes you cry, it makes you angry, it makes you happy, and also the war is not, there's no holding back. The author talks about all the gory brutalities of war, of rape, of sexual assault, of people killing people, everything like that. She does not hold back at all, and so you are kind of like in this action book, but it's also a romance, but it's also so many other issues at play. So yeah, I absolutely love this, going to love it forever, and I don't know, maybe even reread it sometime in the future. The next book for this video is 84th Charing Cross Road by Helen Hanf. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. So this is a non-fiction book, surprising, but it does not feel like a non-fiction book because this is a set of letters which the author, Helen, exchanges with this bookseller in London. So she is kind of like a broke young 20-something-year-old woman in New York who loves reading books, who loves reading classic literature, but she doesn't have access to good copies of that in New York at an accessible rate. So she finds this ad in a newspaper for this bookshop who offers to sell classic literature at really great prices. So she starts this correspondence with them. She buys books from them, and also because Britain was just at the end of the Second World War and they were going into a lot of war rations and they were going through a lot of restrictions, she also helps out the people at the bookstore by sending them packages of food and packages of clothing and all these like little small kindnesses that she gives them, and of course they reciprocate as well. The reason I absolutely adore this book is just this correspondence between two kindred spirits. The main communication is between the author Helen and this guy called Frank Doyle who works at the bookstore, and both of them clearly love books a lot. She reads all these obscure literature text that she wants him to procure, and there's just this warmth, there's this vivaciousness in the correspondence between them, and you just feel so nice, and it's so charming to read about people who love books, who talk about books all the time, and it's just so sweet. So their correspondence and their friendship goes on for several decades after Britain goes out of after Britain's economy recovers as well. And every year the author plans to kind of go visit London because she's looking forward to it so much, but she never ends up doing it because of many different circumstances. But it's just the most charming, sweet book. I was crying by the end of it, and I always love a book which makes me cry. It's just the sweetest book, and some of the lines about books and people who love books they resounded so well with me that I absolutely adored this book. Definitely reading this for many times. It's kind of like Anne of Green Gables to me now, because I feel like I've discovered kindred spirits through this book, this book, and yeah, going to read this forever. And again, another forever favorite. Third book is also a 5-star read for me, and that is The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. I had a reading blog where I talked about reading Clara and the Sun, but right after finishing Clara and the Sun, you can check out that video. I'll be linking it up and down below. I was disappointed with that book, but I immediately went and picked up The Remains of the Day because I wanted Ishiguro's writing. I wanted his best story because I was let down with Clara and the Sun, and this did not disappoint. So this is the story of an aging butler who works at this hall called Darlington Hall. It's this great mansion. He's one of like the last few butlers remaining in England, and he is now working for an American guy who ends up buying Darlington Hall. So he has to like work at the mansion with limited staff. One day he goes on this road trip to meet his ex-colleague who used to work with him at this mansion, and he goes on this road trip trying to with the aim of hoping to convince her to come back and work along with him. And while on the road trip, he kind of reminisces about his life, about his years of service for the previous master of the house, about his father, about his relationship with the person he's going to see at the end of the road trip. So it's just him reminiscing about his life and thinking about his actions and stuff like that. This book is so deceiving. Like when it first starts off, it feels like it's a road trip book. Like, you know, somebody is going on a road trip. There's a lot of flashback. There's a lot of like adventure, something like that. It's so deceiving at the first glance, but as you read, there's so many subtle nuances that come out of this book. It's like you're peeling a layer, and then there's this whole other facade that you've never thought of, and then there's another layer, and then there's another thing. So it's so well done. Like, it is the work of a master. I can see why it's won the Nobel. I can see why it's won the Booker. I can see why all the accolades came from. It's just the most beautifully crafted book. So the butler kind of talks about his notion of dignity, especially in the context of a butler, because now kind of what he's doing is kind of like a dying art in England, and he talks about dignity in labor, dignity in serving his masters. But then as he's, you know, kind of progressing with his road trip, he talks about his previous boss, who was kind of like a Nazi sympathizer, but not exactly. He's kind of like trying to bring Britain and Germany to a common platform. But the butler is kind of like blind to his faults until now, when he's getting to think back on his life, think about the missed opportunities, think about things that had gone wrong in his life, or things that went right which could have gone wrong. It's just beautifully done book. Highly recommend this. Don't read Clara and the Sun. I know it's short longlisted for the Booker now, but it's not worth it. This is his best work. Do read it. 100% recommend. Next 3 books are books which I also read in June and July, which have special mentions because they are also amazing. I've rated all of them 4 stars out of 5, and I highly enjoyed them, and yeah, that's why I want to talk about them. The first one is Exquisite Cadavers by Meena Kandaswamy. This is such a uniquely written book. So first of all, for some context, Meena Kandaswamy's first book was When I Hit You, and she wanted it to be a work of autofiction, but a lot of people classified it as memoir. It is about a woman in an abusive relationship, and that also echoes with Meena Kandaswamy's own life. It lends with this book to ensure that it is very different from her own life. So she has this very unique method of narration where there are 2 parallel narratives on every single page. Like, for example, this one, is her story, the story that the book is about. And these margin notes kind of are basically her thoughts when she's writing this book, her life as it progresses as she's writing this book, her thoughts about India and the regime that it is currently under, and how it is cracking down on a lot of her colleagues and her friends as they fight for an equal India. So it's two different perspectives in the same book. The plot in itself is the story of Maya and Karim. Both of them are a couple living in London. Karim is from Tunisia and he is on a film scholarship in London, and he has to submit a film, but he struggles to kind of fit into the role that the institute kind of designs him to be. That whereas Maya is a London-born British woman. They don't mention her race, but she has a lot of white friends who kind of look at Karim differently, and they're very suspicious of him because of where he's from and his religion and stuff like that. So nobody explicitly says it to her, but there's a lot of like innuendo and a lot of subtle hints. The story in itself is about how they're trying, just the basic struggles of marriage, about how Karim has to go back to Tunisia and Maya has to make a decision on whether she should follow him or she should go on with her life, because she also has things that she's struggling with. So that's the basic plot. The writing is absolutely gorgeous. There's so much depth into each of the dialogue that the characters talk about, and it's very relatable to a young couple living in a new city, and it's just the most beautiful language. But the book loses me because in parts where the author's margin notes are so much more than the plot. They start to take over the plot. I couldn't get past. I was reading more of her thoughts than the story. I was more interested in her life than the story. So because of that, I didn't end up rating this 5 stars out of 5. There were a few pages where just the story was allowed to take front place, and over there it shines beautifully. Maya and Karim are struggling through life and love and commitment, and it shines very beautifully. So I don't know if this parallel narrative was a success, but I really enjoyed it. This book is a book I have an entire reading vlog about. It's The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This was my last week's video. I'll link it up and down below. Do check it out. I'm going to very much in depth about this book, so I won't spend too much time about it over here. But it is the story of Dorian Gray, who is this young man of great beauty, and he sits for a painting, and when over there he meets this other nobleman who kind of puts these ideas of vanity and selfishness into him, and Dorian Gray inadvertently exchanges his soul for eternal youth, and while he stays in his perfect self, the painting starts to age and the painting starts to show evidence of his sins, whereas he's pristine and he's beautiful. So it's a very gothic, macabre kind of a book, and I really did enjoy it. Some of the philosophy parts of it are a little dense. They did lose me out because I am not a philosophy student, or I don't have any expertise in it, but I really enjoyed it. I talk very much in detail about this book in that vlog, so do check it out. But yes, enjoyed this, and 4 stars out of 5 again. The last book for the purposes of this video is The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. This book gave me a headache, and how, but also in the best kind of way. The plot is that Evelyn Hardcastle is going to die at the night of a party that her parents throw in kind of like the threadbare mansion called Blackheath, and this is a cycle which goes on. Like every day she wakes up and she dies at the end of the day, until the other main character in this book his name is Aidan. He has no idea how he's ended up in Blackheath, but he is tasked with the challenge of trying to identify the murderer of Evelyn, and until he identifies the murderer of Evelyn, he cannot escape Blackheath. So it's this murder mystery thriller science fiction kind of a book, and there's so many twists and turns in this book. There's so many characters, there's so many plot points, because he wakes up in a different body each day. Like he's playing a different character of the party, so he has to remember like a shit ton of things about the entire story, about how the day progresses, and it's just, oh man, it's everywhere, it's nowhere, it goes nowhere at times. There's so many plot points and so many elements that you're expected to kind of like weave together into a narrative story, and you do end up getting lost in some places. I definitely did, because there's just so much to remember. But I thoroughly enjoyed the twists and turns. It's just this mind-bending sort of a thriller, and if you are kind of like looking for an escape into a different kind of world, this is just the best book for you. It's a perfect stress buster. That's what I used it for. So I highly recommend it, even though it gave me a massive headache. But yes, amazing book. Comment down below if you've read any of these books and how you felt about them. I would love to talk to you about any of these books and anything else that you're reading actually. So yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, comment, subscribe and all that jazz, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.